Commander Zethkar flexed his forearms in satisfaction as he reviewed the intelligence reports scrolling across his holographic display. The soft blue light cast eerie shadows across his scaled features, highlighting the predatory smile that spread across his reptilian face. Around him, the bridge of the Dominion flagship Eternal Conquest buzzed with the quiet efficiency of a crew preparing for what they believed would be their easiest victory yet. Pathetic, he hissed, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the recycled air. These humans, they call themselves a spacefaring species? His second-in-command, Subcommander Velthara, approached with the characteristic grace of the Saurian race. Her movements were fluid and precise, each step calculated for maximum efficiency. Like all members of their species, she stood nearly 8 feet tall, with obsidian scales that gleamed under the ship's artificial lighting and eyes like molten amber that missed nothing. "The data is confirmed, Commander," she reported, her voice carrying the typical Saurian tone of barely contained disdain. "Humanity has been spacefaring for only 200 of their solar cycles. Their technology is primitive by galactic standards. Their weapons are crude chemical propellants and basic energy systems. Their ships are slow, clunky, and built like—" She paused, searching for an appropriate comparison, like the metal cans they use to store nutrients. Zethkar's laugh was a sound like grinding stone mixed with the hiss of escaping gas. Around the bridge, other Saurian officers joined in the mirth. The sound was genuinely terrifying, a noise that had struck fear into the hearts of dozens of conquered species across 3-star sectors. 200 cycles, he repeated, savoring each word. The mighty Saurian Dominion has ruled the galaxy for over 50,000 cycles. We have conquered civilizations that had mastered faster-than-light travel while these humans were still throwing rocks at each other. The intelligence officer, a younger Saurian named Krixtau, stepped forward nervously. His scales hadn't yet darkened to the deep obsidian of full maturity, still showing patches of the green that marked him as barely out of adolescence by their standards. "Sir, there are some anomalies in the data that our analysts couldn't fully explain," he began hesitantly. Zethkar's head snapped toward him with predatory speed. "Anomalies? Speak." "Well, sir, the humans seem to have an unusual number of conflicts in their historical records. Our xenobiologists estimate they've been engaged in warfare for approximately 98% of their recorded history. Additionally, they seem to have formed emotional attachments to other species from their homeworld. Specifically, they've domesticated several carnivorous creatures, and—" He swallowed nervously. "They call them companions." Velthara snorted, a sound like steam escaping from a pressure valve. "Emotional attachments to inferior species? How wonderfully weak. No wonder they'll be so easy to break." "There's more, sir," Krixtau continued, his voice growing smaller. "They've somehow convinced these domesticated creatures to fight alongside them in their primitive wars. The creatures show loyalty beyond any logical survival instinct. Our behavioral analysts are calling it an evolutionary impossibility." The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of the ship's massive engines. Zethkar stared at the young officer for a long moment, his amber eyes unblinking. Then, he exploded into laughter again, this time even more violent than before. "They fight alongside their food animals? Oh, this is better than I hoped. Not only are they technologically primitive, they're also emotionally compromised by attachment to lesser species." He stood from his command throne, his full 8.5-foot frame imposing even among his own kind. The ceremonial armor that marked his rank gleamed with the polished bones of conquered enemies, each piece a trophy from a different world. "Velthara, begin preparation for planetary assault. Standard overwhelming force doctrine. I want 3 battle groups in attack formation around their primary world within 6 standard cycles. Sir, our strategists recommend the usual approach. Orbital bombardment of major population centers, followed by ground forces to secure resources and process survivors for the slave markets." Zethkar waved a dismissive claw. "No, I want these humans to understand their place in the galactic order before they die. Commence with psychological warfare protocols first. Let them see the futility of resistance. Then, when they're properly demoralized, we'll destroy their cities one by one until they beg for the mercy of slavery." The commander's eyes gleamed with anticipation. In his 3 centuries of military service, he had overseen the conquest of 47 worlds. Each had followed the same pattern: initial contact, demands for surrender, overwhelming display of superior firepower, then either immediate capitulation or swift defeat followed by occupation. The Saurian Dominion had perfected the art of conquest through sheer technological superiority and ruthless efficiency. "What of their military forces?" asked Velthara. Krixtal consulted his data pad nervously. "Their largest vessels are approximately 300 meters in length. Our smallest destroyers are 800 meters. Their weapons appear to be projectile-based with some directed energy systems. Power output is roughly equivalent to our maintenance drones." More laughter rippled across the bridge. Even the usually stoic navigation officer allowed himself a brief, grinding chuckle. "Have they attempted any communication since our arrival in their outer system?" Zethkar asked. "Yes, sir. Repeated broadcasts on multiple frequencies. They seem desperate to establish dialogue. The translation matrix has processed their language successfully. They're asking about our intentions. How quaint. Patch me through to their leadership." It's time they understood what's about to happen to them. Within moments, the main view screen flickered to life, showing the interior of what appeared to be a primitive command center. The human leader was a female specimen, smaller and more fragile-looking than the Saurian officers had expected. She had pale skin, short yellow hair, and eyes the color of Earth's ocean. Despite her diminutive size, she sat straight in her chair with an expression of determined calm. "I am Admiral Sarah Chun of the United Earth Defense Force," the humans said in their strange, soft language. "We've detected your fleet entering our solar system. May I ask what your intentions are?" Zethkar stepped forward, allowing the full, intimidating presence of his species to fill the screen. He had found that the initial visual impact often ended conflicts before they began. "I am Commander Zethkar of the Saurian Dominion. Your intentions are irrelevant. Your world now belongs to us. You have one standard cycle to surrender unconditionally. Resistance will result in the elimination of your species." To his surprise, the human showed no visible fear. Her expression didn't change except for a slight tightening around her eyes. "I see," she said calmly. "And if we refuse? Then you will discover why 47 other worlds now serve the Dominion as resource extraction sites and slave colonies." Admiral Chun was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider his words carefully. When she spoke again, her voice carried a strange note that the translation matrix struggled to interpret. "Commander, I need to ask you something important. In all your conquests, have you ever encountered a species that formed deep emotional bonds with other creatures? Species that would fight to protect those they considered family, even if those family members weren't the same species?" Zethkar blinked in confusion. Of all the responses he had expected, philosophical questions about interspecies relationships wasn't one of them. "Your emotional weaknesses are already noted in our intelligence reports, human. Your attachment to inferior species will make your defeat even more satisfying." Something flickered across the human's face. For just a moment, her calm expression cracked, revealing something underneath that the Saurian commander couldn't quite identify. It wasn't fear, as he had expected. It was something else entirely. "One more question, Commander. How do you feel about dogs?" The question was so unexpected that Zethkar actually paused. "What? Dogs? Canis lupus familiaris. Domesticated descendants of wolves. About this tall." She held up her hands to indicate size. "For legs, tail, fur, loyal beyond measure. Ring any bells? I am not familiar with this creature. Nor do I care about your primitive animal companions." Admiral Chun nodded slowly, and that strange expression crossed her face again. This time, Zethkar realized what he was seeing. It wasn't fear or desperation. It was pity. "Commander Zethkar," she said, her voice taking on an almost gentle tone, "you just made the biggest mistake of your very long life." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the Saurian bridge in confused silence. "Sir," Velthara asked hesitantly, "should we proceed with the attack?" Zethkar stared at the blank screen for a moment, a strange feeling nagging at the back of his mind. In all his years of conquest, no species had ever looked at him with pity. Fear, anger, desperation, hatred, these were the emotions he was accustomed to inspiring. But pity? That was new. He shook his massive head, dismissing the feeling. Begin the attack. These humans are obviously more delusional than our intelligence suggested. It will make breaking them all the more satisfying. But, as the crew began implementing attack protocols, none of them noticed the small ships launching from the human homeworld. Ships that were faster than their sensors suggested possible, moving with purpose toward positions that made no strategic sense according to any military doctrine the Saurians understood. And none of them detected the strange energy signatures emanating from those ships. Signatures that didn't match any weapon system in the Dominion database, but somehow felt familiar in a way that made their reptilian instincts whisper warnings they were too arrogant to heed. The war was about to begin, and the Saurians had no idea that humanity had learned something over their long, violent history that no other species in the galaxy had ever mastered: the art of turning love into a weapon more terrible than any technology could create. The attack began exactly as Zethkar had planned. 3 Dominion battle groups, each consisting of 12 massive warships, moved into optimal bombardment positions around Earth. The humans had scattered their pathetic fleet in what appeared to be a desperate attempt to protect their planet. But their ships were so laughably outgunned that the Saurian commander almost felt guilty about what was to come. "Scanning shows approximately 200 human vessels," reported the tactical officer, his scales rippling with amusement. "Their largest ships are barely 1/3 the size of our frigates. Energy readings suggest weapons roughly equivalent to our point defense systems." Zethkar nodded approvingly. "Begin with the demonstration. Target their largest ship with a single plasma cannon. Let them watch their flagship die. Then, they'll understand the futility of resistance." The targeting systems locked onto a human dreadnought that was broadcasting what appeared to be coordinated commands to the rest of their fleet. It was an ugly, angular thing that looked more like a flying construction tool than a warship. Its hull was scarred metal painted in dull gray, with none of the elegant curves and predatory aesthetics that marked proper Saurian naval architecture. Target acquired. Firing. The plasma cannon discharged with the sound of contained thunder, sending a bolt of superheated energy across the void toward the human ship. At this range, the bolt should have arrived almost instantaneously, reducing the primitive vessel to expanding clouds of ionized metal and organic matter. Instead, something impossible happened. The human ship moved. Not the slow, lumbering turn that ships of its size should have been capable of, but a sudden, darting motion that seemed to defy physics. The plasma bolt sailed harmlessly past its target, continuing on into empty space. "What was that?" Zethkar demanded, his voice dropping to the dangerous hiss that his subordinates had learned to fear. I'm not sure, sir," stammered the tactical officer, his claws dancing frantically over his control surface. "The ship appears to have exceeded its maximum possible acceleration by a factor of 12. According to our physics models, the inertial forces should have liquefied any crew aboard." Before Zethkar could respond, alarms began wailing throughout the bridge. The sensor operator, a female Saurian with scales so dark they were almost black, looked up from her station with confusion written across her features. "Sir, I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout the human fleet. The signatures are unusual. They don't match any known weapon system, and the power levels are far higher than their ships should be able to generate." "Impossible. Show me." The main tactical display shifted to show a real-time representation of the battle space. Each human ship was now glowing with pulsing energy signatures that made no sense according to Dominion science. The energy wasn't flowing through the ship's weapon systems or engines, but seemed to be concentrated in specific sections that served no obvious technological purpose. "There," Velthara pointed with one of her 4 arms. "Those sections of their ships. They're not showing up on our structural scans as weapon systems or engines. What are they?" Before anyone could answer, the human fleet began to move in a pattern that defied every military doctrine the Saurians had ever encountered. Instead of maintaining formation or attempting to engage at maximum range, they were spreading out in what looked like chaos. Ships accelerated in seemingly random directions, some diving below the orbital plane, others climbing above it, and still others making complex spiraling patterns that served no apparent strategic purpose. "They're panicking," Zethkar said with satisfaction. "Look at them scatter like insects when the nest is disturbed." But Crixtal, still monitoring the communications channels, looked up with worry etched across his young features. Sir, I'm not detecting any panic frequencies in their communications. In fact, their chatter has become remarkably calm and focused. They're coordinating something. Coordinating what? They can't possibly pose a threat to. The sentence was never finished. At that moment, something happened that would haunt Zethkar's dreams for the rest of his very short remaining life. The human ships opened fire. But what emerged from their weapons ports wasn't energy beams or projectiles or missiles. Instead, thousands upon thousands of small objects began streaming from each vessel, moving at incredible speeds toward the Saurian fleet. Incoming projectiles, the tactical officer announced. Extremely small, high velocity. They appear to be... Sir, this can't be right. What? The objects are approximately 1 to 2 meters in length, organic composition, and... He paused, double-checking his readings. They're giving off biosignatures. These aren't weapons, sir. They're living creatures. Zethkar felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. Living creatures? The first wave of objects reached the outer edge of the Saurian formation, and something even more impossible happened. The small shapes began to change course with precision that no living creature should have been capable of in the vacuum of space. Each one adjusted its trajectory with mathematical precision, targeting specific points on the Dominion ships with purpose and intelligence. They're wearing some kind of environmental suits, the sensor operator reported, her voice rising with something that might have been fear. Primitive life support systems. And, sir, they're moving independently. Each creature is making its own navigation decisions. The first creatures reached the hull of the Dominion destroyer Blood of Conquest. What happened next would be talked about in hushed whispers throughout what remained of the Saurian fleet for generations to come. The creatures didn't explode. They didn't discharge energy weapons. Instead, they began to cut through the hull with tools that defied analysis. Each one worked with focused intensity, their movements displaying intelligence and purpose that made the Saurian officers question everything they thought they knew about warfare. They're breaching the hull, came the panicked report from the Blood of Conquest. These creatures, whatever they are, they're cutting through our armor like it was soft metal. We're detecting atmosphere loss in 12, no, 15, no, 27 sections. But the most terrifying part wasn't the hull breaches. It was what happened next. The creatures disappeared inside the ship. For several minutes, there was no word from the Blood of Conquest. Then, slowly, reports began filtering in that made no sense according to any military experience the Saurians possessed. Sir, we're getting reports of conflicts inside the ship. Hand-to-hand combat. But the descriptions don't make sense. The crew is reporting that these creatures are fighting with a level of coordination and tactical awareness that the communications officer paused, clearly struggling with what he was hearing, that exceeds our own special forces. That's impossible, Zethkar growled. No creature that small could pose a threat to armed Saurian warriors in close combat. We're apex predators. We've evolved for warfare. The communications officer's scales had gone pale with fear. Sir, the reports indicate that these creatures are not fighting alone. They're working in coordinated groups, and they seem to know exactly where to strike for maximum effectiveness. They're targeting command and control centers, life support systems, and, sir, they're going after the crew with what appears to be strategic precision. On the tactical display, the status indicators for the Blood of Conquest began flickering between green and red in patterns that suggested sections of the ship were being taken and retaken in rapid succession. But, slowly, inevitably, more and more of the ship's systems were showing red. Get me visual contact with their bridge, Zethkar commanded. The view screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the Blood of Conquest. What Zethkar saw there challenged everything he thought he knew about the nature of warfare. The bridge was in chaos, but it wasn't the random destruction of battle. It was surgical devastation. Control panels had been destroyed with precision, targeting specific systems while leaving others intact. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the deck, and, in those shadows, shapes moved with purpose. The creatures responsible for this havoc were unlike anything in the Dominion's xenobiological databases. They were roughly the size that the sensors had indicated, covered in thick fur that ranged from golden to black to brown in color. They moved on four legs with a grace and speed that seemed impossible for animals of their apparent mass. But what struck Zethkar most was their eyes. Even through the video feed, even across the vast distance of space, he could see their eyes. They were intelligent. More than intelligent, they were aware, focused, and absolutely ruthless in their purpose. But the most chilling thing wasn't the creatures themselves. It was their behavior. They weren't acting like wild animals or even trained beasts. They were working together with a level of coordination that rivaled or exceeded the best military units in the Dominion. One would distract Saurian defenders while another flanked them. Groups would coordinate complex maneuvers to systematically clear sections of the ship. They used the ship's own layout against its defenders, demonstrating tactical awareness that suggested not just intelligence, but military training. And they were winning. "Sir," came a weak transmission from the Blood of Conquest. "We need immediate reinforcement. These creatures, they're not just animals. They fight like they've been bred for war, and they seem to understand our technology better than they should. Request immediate assistance." Zethkar stared at the screen in growing horror as he watched a group of the creatures coordinate an assault on the bridge itself. One of them had somehow managed to access a control panel and was manipulating it with startling dexterity, despite having what appeared to be paws rather than manipulative appendages. "How is that possible?" he whispered. "How can animals operate our technology?" Velthara stepped up beside him, her own scales pale with shock. "Sir, perhaps they're not just animals. Perhaps they're some kind of servitor species that the humans have bred for this purpose." But, as they watched, something happened that disproved even that theory. One of the creatures, larger than the others with fur the color of storm clouds, approached a wounded Saurian officer who had become separated from his unit. Instead of finishing the kill, the creature stopped. Its head tilted in what almost looked like a questioning gesture. Then, impossibly, it turned and barked, a sound that somehow carried across the communications channel despite the vacuum of space that should have prevented it. Immediately, every other creature on the bridge stopped what it was doing and looked toward the larger one. In that moment of stillness, Zethkar saw something that chilled him to his very core. They weren't just intelligent. They weren't just coordinated. They were disciplined. These creatures were following orders, showing military rank structure, and demonstrating loyalty that went beyond simple training. The larger creature barked again, and the others resumed their attack, but now they moved with even greater precision. Whatever command had been given, it had improved their tactical effectiveness. "Sir," Crixtal called out, his voice cracking with fear, "I'm detecting similar breach patterns across 17 of our ships. These creatures are simultaneously attacking multiple targets throughout our fleet." On the tactical display, red indicators were spreading like a plague across the Dominion fleet. Ship after ship was reporting hull breaches, internal conflicts, and system failures as the strange creatures systematically tore apart the most powerful navy in known space. Zethkar finally understood what Admiral Chun had been trying to tell him. These weren't just animals. They weren't even just intelligent creatures. These were soldiers. Four-legged, furry soldiers who fought with courage and loyalty and tactical awareness that exceeded anything the Dominion had ever faced. And they were very, very good at war. The Blood of Conquest went dark exactly 43 minutes after the first creatures breached its hull. One moment, it was broadcasting desperate requests for assistance, and the next, all communications ceased. The massive destroyer, which had served the Dominion faithfully for over a century, now drifted silently among the stars like a tomb. Zethkar stood transfixed before the main display, watching as the tactical readout showed similar patterns spreading across his fleet. The creatures had now breached 26 of his 36 vessels, and the internal battles raging within each ship followed the same terrifying pattern. Initial confusion, desperate resistance, then systematic defeat as the four-legged invaders methodically conquered each vessel from within. "Sir," Velthara approached hesitantly, "perhaps we should consider withdrawal. We can return with reinforcements and withdrawal." Zethkar's voice was a deadly whisper. The Saurian Dominion does not withdraw from primitive animals. But even as he spoke, he knew something fundamental had changed. These weren't primitive animals. They were something else entirely, something that challenged every assumption the Dominion had made about warfare, about intelligence, and about the nature of soldiers themselves. The communications officer suddenly straightened at his station. "Sir, incoming transmission from the human flagship." On screen, Admiral Chen appeared again, but this time she wasn't alone. Standing beside her chair was one of the creatures that had devastated his fleet. It was smaller than the ones they had observed in combat, with golden fur and intelligent dark eyes that seemed to look directly at Zethkar through the screen. Most unnervingly, it appeared completely calm despite being in what should have been the command center of a military vessel during active combat. "Commander Zethkar," Admiral Chen said, her voice carrying the same tone of polite concern that had confused him before. "I thought you might want to meet one of the soldiers who's been visiting your ships. This is Captain Rex, of the 1st Canine Space Combat Division." The creature, Captain Rex, sat at attention beside the human admiral with military bearing that would have been impressive in any Saurian officer. Its ears were pointed forward in alert attention, and when Admiral Chun said its name, it turned its head slightly toward her before looking back at the screen with what could only be described as professional interest. "That's impossible," Zethkar breathed. "Animals cannot hold military rank." Admiral Chen's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement. "Commander, with respect, that's exactly the kind of thinking that got you into this situation. You see, you made the same mistake that a lot of species make when they first encounter humans. You assumed that intelligence and military capability were limited to forms similar to your own." She reached down and gently scratched behind Captain Rex's ears. The creature's tail moved slightly, a gesture that somehow managed to be both endearing and absolutely terrifying given what Zethkar had witnessed over the past hour. "Let me tell you about dogs, Commander. We've been partners for over 40,000 years. While your people were still learning to use tools, humans and dogs were already perfecting the art of cooperative warfare. We didn't domesticate dogs, we formed an alliance. We became packmates." On the tactical display, another Dominion ship went dark. "The creatures attacking your fleet aren't animals, Commander. They're soldiers. They've been selectively bred for intelligence, loyalty, courage, and tactical awareness for hundreds of generations. They undergo the same military training as human special forces, with modifications for their unique capabilities. They hold rank, they follow orders, they make independent tactical decisions, and they understand the rules of warfare better than most sentient species." Krixtau looked up from his sensor station, his scales now so pale they were almost white. "Sir, I'm reading massive energy buildups from the human fleet again. They're preparing to launch another wave." But Zethkar was transfixed by what he was seeing on the screen. Admiral Chun had been joined by more of the creatures, dogs, she had called them. Each one sat with perfect military discipline, but their eyes held an intelligence that was unmistakably aware. These weren't trained animals performing tricks. These were soldiers awaiting orders. The first wave consisted of our long-range assault specialists, Admiral Chun continued conversationally. Breeds selected for endurance, intelligence, and ability to operate independently in hostile environments. The second wave will be our close-quarters combat specialists. Different breeds, different capabilities, but equally committed to the mission. "This is madness," Zethkar hissed. "No species in the galaxy fights alongside animals as equals. And that's why no species in the galaxy has ever conquered Earth, Commander." The second wave launched. This time, Zethkar watched more carefully as thousands of shapes streamed from the human vessels. These creatures were different from the first wave, larger, more heavily built, with different proportions that suggested they were indeed specialized for different types of combat. "German Shepherds and Belgian Malinois comprised most of your first wave," Admiral Chun explained, as if she were giving a casual lecture on military tactics. "Breeds known for intelligence, trainability, and tactical awareness. The second wave is primarily Rottweilers, Dobermans, and American Bulldogs. Breeds selected for strength, tenacity, and close-quarters combat effectiveness." The new wave reached the remaining Dominion ships with the same impossible precision as the first. But this time, Zethkar noticed something he had missed before. The creatures weren't just randomly assaulting his fleet. They were coordinating between ships, working together across multiple vessels to implement strategy that spanned the entire battle space. "How is this possible?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Admiral Chin's expression grew more serious. "Because, Commander, you made the mistake of thinking that intelligence and military capability have to look like you. When humans first went to space, we didn't leave our oldest allies behind. We adapted them, trained them, and gave them the tools they needed to fight alongside us among the stars." She gestured, and one of the dogs beside her, a massive creature with black and tan fur, stood and walked to a control panel. With startling dexterity, it used its paws to manipulate controls that seemed designed for its use. "Meet Lieutenant Colonel Khan," Admiral Chin said. "He's coordinating the assault on your command ship." The massive dog looked directly at Zethkar through the screen, and, for a moment, the Saurian commander felt something he had never experienced in 3 centuries of military service. He felt like prey being studied by a predator that was deciding exactly how to proceed with the hunt. "Your ships are designed to repel boarders who think like you do," Admiral Chun continued. "Bipedal, tool-using, hierarchical species who follow predictable tactical doctrines. Dogs don't think like that. They think in pack dynamics. They use senses you can't even imagine, and they approach problems from angles that never occur to conventional military minds." On his tactical display, Zethkar watched as the pattern of red indicators spread across his remaining ships. But now he could see the strategy behind it. The dogs weren't just randomly attacking. They were systematically isolating his vessels, cutting communications between ships, and implementing coordinated strikes that prevented his fleet from mounting any effective defense. "They're hurting us," he realized with growing horror. "Very good, Commander. You're starting to understand. When you hunt in packs for 40,000 years, you develop certain instincts about how to control the movement of your prey." The communications officer looked up with desperate eyes. "Sir, we're receiving surrender requests from 12 of our remaining ships. The commanders are requesting permission to NO." Zethkar roared. "The Dominion does not surrender to animals." But Admiral Chun had heard the outburst. "Commander, with respect, your officers are asking to surrender to fellow soldiers. There's no shame in recognizing when you've been outfought by superior tactics." "Superior tactics?" Zethkar's voice rose to a dangerous pitch. "These are animals." For the first time since the conversation began, Admiral Chin's expression hardened. "Commander, let me explain something to you. Every dog fighting your fleet right now volunteered for this mission. They understand the risks, they understand the objectives, and they chose to put their lives on the line to defend Earth and humanity. They're not animals, they're soldiers. They're not pets, they're partners. And they're not fighting because they're trained to, they're fighting because they love us, and we love them. And that's a bond stronger than any technology you possess." She stood up, and every dog on the bridge immediately came to attention. "You mocked humans for forming emotional bonds with other species. You thought it made us weak. But you never understood what those bonds really represent. When humans and dogs go to war together, we're not just fighting for territory or resources or dominance. We're fighting for family." The tactical display showed that only 8 Dominion ships remained functional. The pride of the Saurian fleet, vessels that had conquered dozens of worlds and terrorized entire star systems, were being systematically defeated by creatures that most galactic species would dismiss as primitive animals. "Last chance, Commander," Admiral Chin said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Order your remaining ships to surrender. Accept defeat with honor, and we'll treat your crews according to the galactic conventions of warfare. Continue this battle, and I'll authorize the 3rd wave." "Third wave?" Zethkar asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. Admiral Chin smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Mixed breeds, Commander. Mutts, street dogs, rescue dogs that humans found abandoned and gave new purpose. Dogs that fight not because they're bred for it, but because they've learned that humans are worth dying for." She paused, letting that sink in. "You've been fighting our professional soldiers, Commander. Our elite forces. The 3rd wave consists of volunteers who fight not because it's their job, but because it's their choice. And there's nothing more dangerous in the universe than someone who chooses to fight for love." On the tactical display, energy signatures began building throughout the human fleet for the third time. But these signatures were different, larger, more numerous, and somehow more intense than anything they had detected before. Zethkar stared at the display, understanding finally, dawning. Humanity hadn't sent their best warriors against his fleet. They had sent their partners. And those partners had proven more than sufficient to destroy the most powerful naval force in Dominion history. He began, then stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. The surrender offer stands for 30 more seconds, Commander, Admiral Chen said quietly. Choose wisely. In the background, every dog on the human bridge was watching him with patient, intelligent eyes, waiting to see what the alien predator would do when cornered by a superior pack.